Hello, everybody. My name is Cody Boffman. I was in care when I was younger. Eventually, I was reunified with my mother, and later we will have a great opportunity to kind of share our insights while we were in the child welfare system. I am currently the co-leader of the National Policy Committee for the Foster Care Alumni of America. We truly want to thank everybody and appreciate you guys for being here to be able to hear kind of our insight. We really want to focus on today putting in that extra effort for every family that we currently serve, truly valuing culture and ethnic roots, and really looking at Family First Service Prevention Act as a huge opportunity for us to be engaged. There's a huge opportunity for us to be able to share our insights and really affect the child welfare system for years to come. Hopefully through this session, you'll be able to come out with concrete examples to change system, break barriers, engage with families, engage with fathers, and break the ice with the families that we currently work with. As a reminder, if you need any assistance today, the help desk is available. I will go ahead and pass this on to Bob.
I'm Bob Friend, Director of the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness at Seneca Family of Agencies, headquartered in Oakland, California. In my portion of the session, I will suggest a primary question to grapple with when conducting systems change, identify key facts which emphasize the urgency of our work, examine the importance of systems alignment as a necessary objective in the systems change process, and then offer ideas and questions I believe are central to this effort. The fabulous presenters to follow will provide more detail and ideas to address key specific areas of family engagement to help affect systems change. So I want to first posit a fundamental question before us as we examine changing systems. How do we change a system designed to protect children from their families to one that supports families to keep their children safe and healthy? Let me repeat that. How do we change a system designed to protect children from their families to one that supports families to keep their children safe and healthy? Obviously, this question needs inspection from a variety of angles and perspectives and will take more than 10 minutes, an hour, or a day of contemplation, never mind action. The charge to successfully pivot from how the system was designed and intended to a system that is almost diametrically opposed to its foundation is indeed a daunting task. Yet it's one we must diligently pursue. It requires an examination of the values, practices, policies, and procedures that serve to support the continuation of a system designed to protect children from their families in order to change that system for the better. Our solutions cannot be limited to tinkering around the edges. So let's begin with some basic facts. Over 10 years ago, legal standards were established to identify, locate, and notify family members and connections whenever a young person enters care. The legislation was driven by the testimony of families and accompanying research that countered the old tropes that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and if people cared about their kin, they'd show up. In fact, when families are notified that their kin need their love, attention, and support, they overwhelmingly respond, and our current systems are often challenged to receive, respond to, and welcome their interest. Next, research definitively tells us that children and youth do better with their family than without them, and that collaborative practice which involves family produces better and more lasting positive outcomes than isolated decision-making conducted by one or more professionals. Finally, 21st century science has determined that the impacts of separation, isolation, and loneliness are devastating to human health, and even more so to the developing brain and DNA of a child. Furthermore, that relationship-rich networks of love and support are far more powerful and healing than any trauma-based or evidence-based practice delivered by professionals. So given these facts, how can we continue to allow our systems to limit or devalue the presence and power of families? So let's look at some ideas and opportunities to activate the change process. Firstly, let me suggest that child welfare agencies and all system partners adopt and consistently align to the values and principles that families, beginning with parents, are the primary asset needed for the health and safety of their children. Families, beginning with parents, are the foremost experts in their own lives and in the lives of their kin. Therefore, all decision-making about family must include those family experts, beginning but not limited to parents. At the leadership and executive levels of child welfare agency and the partners, establishing and consistently holding an unwavering shared agreement and accountability to these core values is essential to changing systems. When systems are not aligned with regard to these principles, families are harmed. Avoiding or ignoring the lack of alignment to these principles is to knowingly participate in the continuation of the harm that unnecessary separation and isolation inflicts. I submit to you it's your duty to relentlessly work towards establishing better and more aligned relationships with every system partner and to hold each other accountable to these principles. Secondly, by examining the experience that families face and including partners and those with lived experience in that examination, leaders can learn what practices, policies, routine decision-making, and operations currently support the involvement of families, and what interferes with or deters family involvement. Process mapping and like activities will promote a clear picture of what's currently occurring, which can lead to understanding the design of what can and must be done to alter unwelcoming paths to engagement. Then concluding with abolishing internally and with partners obsolete practice models and theories which separate and isolate family members and limit or prevent communication between them. Continuing along with the theme that families are the primary assets, essential to healing, and experts in their own lives, how can we engage them and utilize that expertise in order to support changing our systems for the better? Beyond process mapping, how else can you involve people with lived experience to support and guide your efforts? People with lived experience can be extraordinarily helpful to defining what success looks like and shifting efforts to support work along the prevention continuum so that we stop impacting families unnecessarily and we provide them what they need when they need it instead of what we have, whether they need it or not. What partners would parents, children, and families say they trust to share their struggles with long before any child welfare system involvement would occur? Would a more immediate and supportive response to families impact the size and purpose of the child welfare agency and our child welfare system? Would that shift restore power to parents, families, and communities to access and create both formal and informal supports that are more culturally responsive than any government system? I think yes. People with lived experience can provide you with valuable feedback and insight about what effective engagement looks like. So you, your program managers, supervisors, trainers, and coaches ensure that effective engagement is not left up to the discretion of the worker. How will you emphasize the importance of skill building and support of the workforce, along with the accountability and measurement beyond that of worker self-report, to ensure that effective engagement consistently occurs? How would your recruitment and hiring process change to attract people who excel at relationship development, facilitating meetings, and advocating for families? How would your evaluation process of the workforce change? What impact would that have on retention and promotion qualifications? And then how can we increase the impact of those with lived experience on our program evaluation process? We've seemingly trended towards charting and tracking thinner and thinner slices of child and youth behavior based upon the belief that this will create greater evidence of effectiveness. Yet the evidence is overwhelming that those who do not feel they belong to their or any family or experience love and support from family do exceedingly poorly in the present and the future as a whole. So why aren't the vast majority of our measurements geared towards learning how best to support families prior to and in times of crisis? And what's most helpful when youth are living temporarily out of the home is required, using their voices and experiences as guides, instead of developing instruments measuring children's behavior in systems already known to be harming. So looking ahead to connect the dots to the other presenters in our session, how can we better engage parents and their children as a unit to operate together and support each other? Denise and Cody will share their experiences and ideas immediately following. How can we more consistently and effectively engage, support, and learn from Native families? Marilyn will speak to the wisdom and experience of engaging Native parents, children, their families, and their communities. What if we dependably identified fathers and engaged and embraced their families? How might our system benefit from the perspective of more fathers? How would our family meetings improve if fathers were more welcomed and reliably attending? Eugene will provide much more description, detail, and ideas about father engagement. We know that children in care, along with their parents, do better when fostering occurs as co-parenting. How can we support and further co-parenting, whether with kin or with resource families? Dennis will speak to the experience of the Icebreaker activity in Kansas to promote relationship development between caregivers and parents. Finally, wrapping up, as a child welfare system, we need to determine what we will do to hold ourselves accountable for the historic racial inequality and disproportionality that has impacted families, communities, and tribes, and then take the necessary effort to reverse those outcomes. After all, the Social Work Code of Ethics requires us to do no harm. We should aspire to far more and settle for nothing less. Ensuring that families are essential participants in all child welfare decisions and actions would be a significant step to changing systems. I'll now hand it over to Denise Moore and Cody Boffman, who will be talking about breaking barriers. Take it away, Denise and Cody.
Hi, everyone. I'm Denise Moore, a family consultant with the Capacity Building Center for States. I've also been working alongside DHS and Children and Families of Iowa for approximately 13 years, developing and implementing a parent partner program. I went from one of the very first birth parents sitting at the table to actually coordinating a whole service area. So I was in charge of 15 counties in central Iowa to monitor and maintain and provide data for the parent partner program. I also do some work with 0 to 3. I am a consultant for them and their Safe Babies court teams. And I do some work with Casey Family Programs and the Birth Parent National Network.
Hi, everybody. I'm a former foster care youth alumni. I used to be on the National Foster Care Alumni Policy Council. I'm also the co-leader of the National Policy Committee for the Foster Care Alumni of America. I've been working with families at Children's and Families of Iowa for the past 5 years, but I have about 12 years of advocating experience. It's actually really kind of cool because we've been able to, me and my mom have been able to work together to bring different perspectives to the table. So.
And it's really changed the culture of our system. We have parents and young people sitting at all our policy and decision-making tables. They help develop the program from the very beginning. So they've actually designed it, and then we implemented it, and it's just amazing to see the results within our system.
So we really want to kind of dive into kind of what worked well for our family. But what kind of worked well for you while going through the case?
So there's lots of things that worked well. I had an amazing worker, and she helped hold me accountable. She worked with me on parenting skills. All my kids got to stay in their same home, which was unheard of in 2003. I had, I had all of my kids, all 6 of them, removed for substance abuse, and then we went and managed our way or navigated our way through the system.
So something that really helped me a lot when we were going through it was being able to be placed with my grandma. So I had a really great relationship with my grandma already before the case ever even opened. We were extremely close. So being able to be placed with her and actually having all my brothers and sisters was a huge thing for Because that was my support. That was my core group of people. My brothers helped, we helped look after each other. I mean, there was a lot of us. So I had two older brothers, a younger brother, and two little sisters, one that was just born. So it was essential to keep us all together because that was our who we relied on to. That's who protected me, and I helped protect my little brothers and sisters, and really keeping us in the community that we were already in. And we were able to still play sports. We were still able to go to the same school, keep our same friend group, that kind of stuff. So it was really nice to be able to keep us all together as one family. And while my mom was kind of working on her. But with all the different things that really worked well for us, what do you think could have been better or changed for you while going through?
When in 2003, we were still receiving case plans in the mail. So I think some guidance from the very beginning and a path to go would have been helpful for me. I wasted a lot of time trying to figure out, am I supposed to go to this treatment center? Am I supposed to, what's my next steps? Who do I talk to? And I continued using for almost a year, and to the place where we were almost at termination. So I think just really having a clear path of a way to move forward for families is huge. And also the support of their workers. I mean, just that guidance on what's the next steps, what's this meeting going to look like. The system's very scary for families, and being able to have that kind of support system is critical.
See, like when I was going through it was like a whole different thing, right? So like when I was growing up, I was taught to grow up at a very young age. I had to be able to take care of my little brother and sister. Um, Growing up in that environment, we took on responsibilities that most kids were not, necessarily aware of. So when we were placed with my grandma, there was a lot of financial struggles that we were facing, just for the sense that, I mean, this lady, she was a single woman who just took in six different kids, and it wasn't cheap to feed us. So there was a lot of my grandmother could have used a lot more support, a lot more financial support, a lot more just support in general of having her whole entire life completely changed with all me and my brothers and sisters there. Um, so during that process, though, I still was struggling to let go. I was being told to be a kid. I wasn't being, my input wasn't being valued. I wasn't being heard. And that was a struggle for me because for so long I was so used to trying to take care of stuff. Trying to, like I was always checking the bills. I was always making sure that, we had enough money to eat, and that if the light was on, most likely our water was going to be off, kind of thing. So I was still struggling with that. So eventually, when we were reunified with my mom had worked on herself the entire time to be this amazing mom. But I wasn't ready to deal with my mom. My mom was an actual parent. So when I came back home, I wasn't ready to let her have that power back either. I thought we were going back to our normal lives where, we just kind of did our own thing. My mom did her own thing, and we just looked out for each other. And so it took me years. I mean, years, like 3 years before I was outside and I was at the mailbox and I was opening up bills like normal. And I was just checking, like, where are we at? Like, how much do we owe? That kind of stuff. And my mom stopped me and she's like, Cody, you got to stop. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, you have to be a kid and you have to allow me to be your mom. Like, you have to stop. And I struggle with that because I'm like, I was always taught at a young age to take care of my, like we took care of things that we needed to take care of. So that was a huge struggle because she was this great person and I hadn't worked on myself yet. So with these different barriers and things like that, how do we look through this with a prevention lens? And I think that's really just how do we better engage families? because my voice wasn't being heard very well. I think it really just takes the effort provided by the state to ask me what's going on, how are you feeling, what does your family need? Because if they just asked me, they would have figured out what was going on because I knew what was going on in the family. So there's this value in the voice, and then also the second level of prevention, which I think we don't talk enough about, and that is also making sure the reunification goes well. Because there's a lot of kids who are coming home who aren't ready to come home. Their parents are becoming these amazing people, but these kids are getting the time with their parents to really understand what is different, what is changed. Um, like I said, it took me 3 years to finally start letting go, to allow my mom to be the mom who she is today. And that struggle could have been a lot easier if we would have worked as a family before coming home and had services in place even after reunification. What do you think would have been better?
Absolutely. I mean, through prevention, just surrounding our family with supports. Um, as a family, we didn't have family counseling or anything that was going to help us through that process. So I think as many community supports that could have been surrounded by us, it would have been vital for the prevention of the removal. Real quickly, I just want to touch on how much leadership had to do with with our with my particular situation. And if it wasn't for leadership, really opening the doors and allowing me to be me and support me through going and getting my degree, giving me a job, building a parent partner program, it just wouldn't have been possible. And our leadership was 100% backing us and still are some of my biggest supports today.
Well, and I think there's also a level of the leadership that it took for the caseworker to keep us all in the home. Because the home, it was pretty surreal to have our family be able to stay in the same home,
Right.
which was technically classified as like a drug home. So that's kind of our story. We really want to pass it on over to Marilyn Bruyere Zimmerman to talk a little bit more about engaging Native families.
Thanks, Cody and Denise. As they've introduced, I'm Marilyn Bruyere Zimmerman, and I'm an enrolled citizen of the Nakota people that live on the Fort Peck, Assiniboine, and Sioux Reservation in Montana. And a big part of our way of honoring people in our community, those that we respect, those that we want to acknowledge as leaders, we often give a star quilt to. And the star quilt is made up of 8 points, and the points represent our ancestors reaching down from the stars and our people reaching up in order to create this wholesome, vibrant community. And so what we're going to be talking a little bit about today is becoming trauma-informed and what that looks like for trauma-informed family engagement of Native families. So I like to think about our tribe and all of the tribes in North America were this intact, beautiful star quilt. It was the fabric of the community, the fabric of the tribe. It was wholesome, it was vibrant, but with European contact, the very fabric of our tribal families and communities was torn. And we really sustained a lack of connectedness, like the star quilt represents that connectedness of the stars. Our tribal practices, including our ceremony and spiritual practices, were impacted by colonization. So when Europeans settled in North America, the fabric of tribal families was torn. The tribal communities were decimated through colonization. What is thought by many of the most detrimental practices of assimilation to children, families, and the entire tribe was really the boarding school experience. When generations of children were removed from their nurturing, loving, supportive families and communities, and instead of growing up as cherished members of wholesome families, they experienced the trauma of separation, endured maltreatment and neglect, and often experienced the trauma of abuse, both emotional, psychological, physical, and sexual abuse. And they came home lacking strong cultural identity and struggled with finding their place in their families and communities. Many developed unhealthy coping strategies like substance use or physical violence or abuse. Many struggle with suicidal thoughts. We continue to struggle with chronic health issues. And, but we really do believe, many of us tribal members, that what has been the most impactful is the lack of knowledge about how to parent our children in loving, nurturing cultural ways. So how do we provide trauma-informed family engagement for Native families? It's foundational to the engagement to really have a deeper understanding of historical and intergenerational trauma and its impacts on the family and the local tribe. Understanding local context is going to be critical to engagement and sustaining relationship with Native families. Also, trauma-informed engagement of Native families has to begin by focusing on building trust with the families, trust as it is defined and understood by the Native family, not the child welfare worker. Responses to services may be impacted by their own trauma histories. It may be impacted by the fact that the system that you represent is one of the traumas that they've experienced. Have experienced trauma through. This is also understanding that you have to understand the story, family story, and it's got to be understood in historical and contemporary context. That includes accessing resources and what that looks like for the family. What are the agencies and the systems that are meant to serve American Indian families that have not done, that have been chronically under-resourced for decades, and what will that look like as we begin to think about the strengths of the family, the strengths of the tribe, and the strengths of the community. So trauma-informed approaches to family engagement also means that the child welfare worker understands and is able to identify and empathetically respond to family members who have trauma histories that have not been identified yet. They don't know they have a trauma history, right? We don't know that they have a trauma history. So that when we have an engagement with them and we may trigger them, a circumstance may trigger them, a smell or a sound may trigger them. And just to remember that if we're trauma informed, we have to remember to depersonalize those sorts of behaviors that we encounter. The anger or the frustration that we encounter from either the parent or a family member. Anger and resentment and avoidance are likely trauma responses. And so to think of those behaviors that way rather than non-compliance. Remember the behavior is happening around you, but it's not about you. Keep asking yourselves, is this behavior non-compliance, or is this caregiver being triggered? What's happening in front of me? So becoming trauma-informed with engagement with Native families means understanding that each family is different, even within the context of the same community. So one size doesn't fit all in our approaches. Be aware that cultural engagement with the family is really fluid. One family member may be a devout Pentecostal Christian, while another practice the ceremonies or rituals of the tribe. Being respectful of all beliefs and ways of being in the world is required. Being not judgmental is a given, but do the work of maintaining objectivity. The child welfare worker must reflect on your own biases, unpack your own history with trauma, and be vigilant to use the best practices of secondary traumatic stress mitigation. Also, becoming trauma-informed means that you'll focus on the strength and the resources of the family, looking beyond the family, though, not just in the family and the household, but looking to the kinship relationships across the community and the reservation, focusing on the outcomes the family identifies as important to their well-being, and supporting realistic outcomes. A big part of trauma-informed family engagement of Native families isn't just about the the best practices. It really is about having trauma-informed primary prevention. And what does that look like? And again, really understanding the historical and intergenerational trauma is foundational. Having a basic understanding and appreciation for the Indian Child Welfare Act that honors tribal sovereignty and seeks to ensure that children stay in their tribal communities if removed from their homes. And be someone who engages in self-reflections to regularly check your own biases again, really looking at your biases and your stress levels. So when we think about primary prevention with a universal focus, that means that we have to seek to raise not just the awareness of child maltreatment in our community, tribal communities, but really promote knowledge of local tribal practices, parenting practices, which means establishing authentic relationships with tribal members and with tribal child serving agencies and the community. Utilizing parent programs and support groups that focus on tribal, customary, child development, and tribal cultural expectations, and the roles and responsibilities of tribal parenting, as well as the role of the extended family and the entire community. So how do we connect with agencies that serve American Indian families and communities? We really have to be intentional about developing relationships with formal service providers, and that includes schools and tribal leadership, developing relationships with informal services, such as getting to know who the tribal spiritual and cultural leaders and teachers are, who are the local pastors or priests, the Boys and Girls Club workers, what resources are out there. And then really participating in the family and in the community, going to local cultural and social gatherings like powwows or feeds, or up in my neck of the woods, basketball is king, going to the high school basketball games. Tribal community members notice and they will appreciate you as a member of their community. So final thought, keep a rigid state of flexibility, adjust, adapt, change timelines, expectations, and outcomes. You have the privilege of bearing witness, not only to a Native family's trauma, but also bearing witness to their journey to healing. You're privileged to participate in the restoring of the family and repairing the fabric of the community to wholeness, so that once again, the community is a beautiful star quilt, able to wrap families in warmth and protection. With that, I'd like to introduce Eugene Schneeberg, Senior Fatherhood and Family Specialist, National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, who will be talking about engaging fathers.
Well, thank you, Marilyn, and hello, everyone. My name is Eugene Schneeberg, and I'm the outreach lead for the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse and former director of the U.S. Department of Justice Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. But my most important title is Father of Four. My goal today is to share some best practices for working with fathers involved in the child welfare system that can help leaders like you improve outcomes related to paternal engagement. And also to share some strategies that will increase participation of the fathers that you work with and equip child welfare leaders with the knowledge and tools to better engage and support fathers. The issue of engaging fathers in child welfare is both personal and professional. I'm a fatherhood engagement trainer for child welfare agencies. I'm a foster father, soon to be adopted father. But as a child, I was on the verge of entering the child welfare system due to allegations of abuse and neglect. Also, I've never met my father, and this has given me a unique insight into how to help design programs for fathers at the national, state, and local level. Fatherhood is personal for all of us. I want you to think about your relationship with your father. How would your life have been different if your father wasn't involved? How would your children's lives be different if their fathers weren't involved? What have you learned from your father, either good or bad? All of our lives are dramatically impacted by our fathers. And if you can successfully engage the fathers and paternal family members of the children you serve, you'll have gone a long way to improving outcomes for those young people. Now, some people think that being intentional about engaging fathers and empowering fathers somehow minimizes the critical importance of mothers. Nothing could be further from the truth. If we're being honest, the data is clear. Mothers and children are better when fathers are better. And I want to take a second to shout out my mom, my wife, my sister, and all the amazing mothers out there who recognize how important fathers are. On the other hand, others think that fatherhood work is somehow exclusive to men. This also couldn't be further from the truth. Women in child welfare are critical and are championing the issue of fathers all across the US. Without them, the progress that's been made around empowering fathers couldn't be possible. As I said earlier, I'm the outreach lead for the National Responsible Father Clearinghouse. I want to take a second and I want to find out how many of you are familiar with fatherhood.gov. If you're not, I want to encourage you to visit fatherhood.gov and subscribe to our listserv. There you'll receive the latest in grant opportunities, research. You can also access our archived webinars specifically on engaging fathers in child welfare. You can also sign up to join our brand new virtual learning community. My colleagues and I have also put together some really great free resources on engaging fathers that you can download in the handouts window. I'm fortunate to be from a region that invests significantly in fathers, and I want to highlight a few of those jurisdictions. First, Prince George's County, Maryland, Department of Social Services refers fathers from their family preservation unit to a great fatherhood group, a place where fathers can come together in a safe place where they can be vulnerable, share, and exchange. Fairfax County, Virginia, has been prioritizing outreach to fathers for over a decade. And the City of Alexandria Department of Children and Families has hired full-time fatherhood coordinator. Each of these jurisdictions have seen dramatic increases in their ability and their capacity to engage fathers. I also want to encourage the child welfare leaders watching this session that they can identify local fatherhood programs at fatherhood.gov by visiting fatherhood.gov and clicking on the programs map. There you can search your local area and identify local programs in your area. There's a few questions I think that will help each of us to assess how effectively our agency is doing in engaging fathers. One, are we including the needs of fathers in our delivery model? Are we providing family-friendly services in our agency? Are we portraying positive, diverse images of fathers on our posters, brochures, and books? Are we creating positions on staff that serve fathers? And are we providing training opportunities for our staff? And are we expecting that fathers participate in programs? Lastly, are we designing programs for fathers as well as mothers and children? I want to share a quote from Dr. Michael Lamb from Cambridge University. He says, "I think the research has shown that the stereotype of the uninvolved, disinterested, low-income father is really misleading. That contrary to that stereotype, the research shows that these fathers have the same motivation and are as committed to doing whatever they can to promote their child's welfare." We know from the research that positively engaged fathers, children with positively engaged fathers demonstrate lower levels of disruptive behavior, acting out, and particularly with boys, lower levels of depression. For girls, they demonstrate improved self-esteem, increased confidence, and a willingness to try new things. Also, children with positively engaged fathers demonstrate improved school readiness and increased cognitive development. Studies also indicate that children who grow up with involved fathers are 39% more likely to earn A's in school, 45% less likely to repeat a grade, 60% less likely to be expelled from school, and twice as likely to go to college. Some key elements of engaging fathers is when you're working with dads, you want to individualize each case. You want to ensure that your staff are not bringing in their own implicit biases to when they're working with dads. They want to judge each dad on its own merits. You want to assume that the dads want to be involved. You want to demonstrate respect for him as a parent, and you want to really listen because he has a story to tell. Now, several agencies struggle to recruit and retain dads. So I want to share 3 keys to being successful in that area. Whenever possible, hire former child welfare parents, as we saw earlier in Denise's case, that can help recruit parents. Word of mouth is always the most effective method to recruit. Secondly, when you're hosting events or you're recruiting dads, it's really important that you use the word father or dads in your marketing materials and your outreach. Some agencies generalize and lump mothers and fathers together and just call it parent group or parent training. But when dads hear fathers or dads, whether it's donuts for dads or father-daughter dance or fishing with dads, somehow our ears perk up. And lastly, incentives are really critical. We all know dads like to eat. So if you can offer food, particularly if your group is being held in the evening, that's going to be key. Or provide childcare or transportation. Anything you can do to reduce barriers for fathers is really critical. As I close, I want to recap by emphasizing that the earlier you engage fathers, the better your chances are of retaining their involvement. We all want to remember that the ultimate beneficiary of responsible fatherhood programs and engaging fathers are the children. Women, child welfare professionals are critical to the success of engaging fathers. And fathers need the same resources, respect, and support that mothers need to be effective parents. I want to remind you that my colleagues and I at the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse have put together great resources for you on engaging fathers that you can download in the handouts window. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Dennis Alford from the Kansas Department of Children and Families, who will be talking about breaking the ice.
Thanks, Eugene. And hi, everyone. I'm Dennis, and I've been part of our team in Kansas implementing Icebreakers. The reality for many families involved in the foster care system includes children who are not only disconnected from their family, but from everything else familiar, such as their school, daily routines, and friends. And when a child is removed, parents are likely trying to cope with their own array of feelings, such as shock, guilt, and loss. On top of that, parents often receive very little information about where their child is or even who they're with. And all of this can be overwhelming to a parent whose child has just been placed in care. But this is a reality we can change because today so much more is known about the effects of trauma and just how important it is to keep families engaged and involved in the parenting of their child in care. So during this session, I'm going to share Kansas's story of engaging families through icebreaker conversations. The Icebreakers model was developed through an initiative supported by the Annie E. Casey Foundation. The Icebreaker is simply an opportunity for a child's parents and foster parents to meet each other. And during a facilitated but informal conversation, parents and foster parents share information about themselves and their families, and they talk about the needs of the child in care. The Icebreaker should be held as soon as possible after a child's initial placement in foster care and as soon as possible after any subsequent placement change. The Icebreaker is not a place to talk about things like why the child entered care or the status of the case. There are so many other meetings focused on decision-making and paperwork. And so what sets the Icebreaker apart is its time set aside to exclusively focus on relationship building. So much so that Kansas decided we don't want people to think of the Icebreaker as just another meeting because it's not like other meetings they may be used to. And so we started calling them Icebreaker conversations. The Icebreaker itself is just one conversation, but what the Icebreaker does is it opens the door for ongoing communication and shared parenting. And we know this can help reduce the disruption and trauma of placement for the child, reduce the parents' worries and anxieties, and improve the foster parents' abilities to meet the child's needs. In 2018, we piloted Icebreakers in a handful of counties around the state. And one day in August, a 7-year-old girl, I'll call Emma, was removed from her home and placed in a foster home about 45 minutes away. Emma was removed in part due to her parents' drug use, and the caseworker was told that reunification would probably be unlikely. So the Icebreaker was held 5 days later, giving the parents and foster parents the chance to meet and talk and share information. And then after the Icebreaker, they continued talking. They worked together so that the foster parents could buy and present Emma with a new outfit for her first day of school. The parents were invited to Emma's school events her dance lessons, and even into the foster home for Thanksgiving. And then in December, Emma went back home after just 4 months in care, and the foster parents continued to be a support and resource for the whole family. And while I can't promise every case will be like Emma's, every icebreaker can be a meaningful opening for family engagement, a platform for recognizing parents as the experts about their children, and an opportunity to achieve safe and timely reunification. So if your state or jurisdiction is interested in icebreakers or maybe another strategy that strengthens these relationships, what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing I want to tell you. The road ahead is so much bigger than squeezing a new practice into whatever you're already doing now. If your state's anything like Kansas, cultivating relationships between parents and foster parents means completely transforming your child welfare system's culture and climate. And if you're anything like me, that sounds completely daunting on an existential level. And that's why I want to tell you about 2 things your team can do to support and sustain systems change. Number 1 is storytelling. Just like Emma's story, you're going to have your own success stories along the way. And stories just have a way of sticking with us. So don't underestimate the power of collecting, telling, and celebrating those stories. One way we collect stories is we just ask for them. At the end of each icebreaker, we offer parents and foster parents and youth, if they're there, the opportunity to complete a survey with their feedback and comments. Overwhelmingly, we hear how relieved parents are after meeting foster parents, and how when their worries and anxieties are reduced, they're better able to focus on the child's needs and building their own capacity to meet those needs. After one icebreaker, a parent stopped making reports to our child abuse and neglect hotline because she got to meet the foster parents and she finally felt reassured about her child's care. And in another case involving a baby, the foster parent offered to communicate with the mother every week and provide a weekly report about the child's progress. And if the mother was having a hard day, the foster parent said, just text me and I'll provide you with a daily update or send a picture to help get you through. Another thing we know is that meeting and working together may also help dispel any negative misunderstandings or global assumptions parents and foster parents could have about one another. One facilitator wrote to us and said, when the foster parent said they had pictured the parent differently, that's when it hit me how important it is for them to meet in the beginning. In another case, the foster parent was not comfortable with the mother attending the child's medical appointments based on information in the file. But at the icebreaker, the foster parent saw how grateful the mother was and how much it meant for her to attend the child's one-year checkup. And so the foster parent quickly changed her mind and invited the mother to all of the child's upcoming appointments. Last fall, we shared our Icebreakers work at an annual child welfare conference here in Kansas. And part of that presentation included storytelling through a panel of facilitators and foster parents and the Kansas Family Advisory Network, who works with parents and families across the state. Both of the foster parents said they went into the Icebreakers with their minds made up not to share any of their contact information with the parents. But then they did, and they were glad they did. One of the foster parents now texts and sends pictures of the newborn to the parents, and they've even talked about what keepsakes the parents want her to save for them, like the baby's hospital bracelet and onesie. And the other foster parent set up video calls with the father so that he could watch his child practice the violin. As an aside, and something we didn't expect, or at least something I didn't expect, one other thing Icebreakers helped us realize is sometimes these assumptions and misunderstandings are actually perpetuated by the language we often use when we're recruiting foster parents. Icebreakers helped us really think about and talk about and re-examine the way we portray foster parenting. Because we know foster care is not about swooping in and saving a child. It's a temporary support to the entire family until reunification is possible. Okay, and number two, the second thing you can do to create and sustain change is by creating artifacts. And what I mean by that is creating the tools and supports that will help others discover and understand your culture. In Kansas, we created artifacts to formalize icebreakers within our practice and to let everyone know that we expect parents and foster parents to meet and to work together to some extent. So we incorporated Icebreaker's language into our policies and protocols, and even into our formal partnerships with private providers. We established a half-day group-based training for staff prior to facilitating their first icebreaker. We added a module about icebreakers into our pre-service training required for all new foster parents. And for our existing foster parents and any interested community members, we developed an online training course about icebreakers that counts toward their annual training hours. We also created a brochure to help parents and foster parents prepare for the icebreaker and to give them an idea of what to expect. And finally, we've turned some of our amazing stories into artifacts themselves. We incorporate storytelling into our materials for trainings, and we've even captured some of these stories on video. So for Kansas, Icebreakers is in many ways a bit of a first step. And to be honest, there's still a lot of work for us to do with Icebreakers and beyond. But there's also a lot of motivation and energy to make that culture shift and to utilize foster care as a support for the entire family. I heard this metaphor once that has kind of stuck with me over time, and I don't even remember the topic, but the language I think is fitting when I think about where we are in Kansas, and maybe it will be helpful for you. Engaging families is not a line you cross, it's a road you take. And so if your organization is on that same road, and especially if you're strengthening relationships between parents and foster parents, I would love to hear about what you're doing and maybe what your advice would be in the chat.
Please note that the resources for today's session are available in the to download in the handouts window. Thank you again for attending this session. We truly appreciate it. Thank you for our team of presenters. They did an amazing job. We hope that you are inspired about the many different ways to engage the families and the opportunities that we have moving forward. Leadership is going to be a critical piece to making sure a lot of these things happen and we move together and truly change our systems. Please don't forget to visit the exhibit hall, roll up your sleeve sessions, and our networking lounge. Stay put for our next facilitators to join us. And as always, thank you.